It started with a broken fence post, not a loud crash, not a scream in the night, just one cedar rail splintered clean through, and Silas Marrow, who had lived alone for 13 winters, knew the land well enough to feel when something shifted. The wind didn't sound right that morning, and the air too still for a sky that clear. He was out behind the barn when he noticed the pig rooting hard at the far end of the dry patch. Same spot as last week, same spot as years ago. Back then when the sheriff came out here, they said it was just an accident, a runaway, a girl nobody claimed. Silas never told them he'd found the ribbon first, never told them it was buried shallow, curled with dried blood, the same shade as the girl's name he never learned. He thought it was over. He built his fences strong. He kept to himself. He thought the land had gone quiet again, until now. Until the pig dug up the edge of a bone that didn't belong to any animal. Until Silas stood over the place where no one was supposed to return and whispered, "It's happening again." But this time, the girl wasn't dead, not yet. What did he uncover? Who is she? And why does the past seem to be walking back through the front gate? Stay with us. Because what one man found buried in the dust may just unearth everything he's been trying to forget. The wind that morning carried something wrong with it. Silas Marrow knew this land too well not to notice. 43 years old, 27 of them spent working this stretch of dry soil. The hills rolled quiet, but not asleep. The kind of quiet that held its breath. He had risen before the sun, same as always fed. The mare checked the fence line, emptied the ashes from the stove. The cold still clung to the porch rails, not willing to leave just yet. Another day of sameness, another day without her. His wife Mara had been gone 7 winters now. Consumption. No one called it that anymore, but he did. It sounded slower, softer, like a fading, not a theft. Since then, the ranch had held on with just him, the dog, and silence. But that morning, the dog, old Finn, wouldn't come past the front gate. Ears back, low whimper. Wouldn't move no matter how gently Silas called him. He didn't shout, just walked alone. The cottonwoods near the western slope looked the same, swaying like old men muttering. But the pig pen empty, the trough untouched. The pigs wouldn't go near the northern fence where the ground rose up slightly, just enough to cast a different kind of shadow. And that's where he saw it. A mark on the earth, not fresh, not old. More like something had been moved. The soil turned strange, like a memory trying to stay buried. A few feet away, a small wooden cross lay half buried, no name, no carving, just weathered wood tied with a red ribbon. And next to it, a child's shoe. Silas bent down, slow and careful, holding his breath the way one might when listening to a story that's not quite done. The shoe was worn smooth, pale blue, once now gray, the size tiny. He didn't speak, just stared at it like it might answer something. He whispered, not to anyone in particular. "It's happening again, isn't it?" And the wind answered by not moving at all. Who buried the child's shoe? And why does Silas feel like he's seen this before? 3 days had passed since Silas Marrow found the small leather shoe caught in the north fence line. The wind still hadn't returned. Trees stood frozen. The creek ran like it had forgotten to move, and even old Finn the dog had quit barking when hooves passed the gate. No one asked questions, but the land felt like it was waiting. Silas hadn't told anyone about the shoe, or the wooden cross half buried beneath it. He placed both into the tin box his wife once kept letters in, locked it, and shoved it deep behind the wood stove, as if hiding it meant the past might stay quiet. But that night, something knocked. He was by the hearth reading the same note his wife left behind, the words smeared from time and tears when he heard it. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 knocks. Slow, patient, not asking to be let in, just refusing to leave. He opened the door. No one stood there. But there were tracks, small, wet, pressed into the porch boards leading toward the old stable. The door to the stable groaned open with a tired breath. Inside was a girl, 12 maybe. Thin hair tangled like bird's nest, dress worn to threads. She held a bundle wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Her eyes didn't beg. They didn't blink much either. It was the look of someone who had come a long, hard way and left part of herself behind. She didn't speak, just stepped forward and offered the bundle like it mattered more than she did. Silas knelt down. He didn't touch her. He only asked, voice soft as the dust on the rafters, "What is it?" She pulled back the corner of the blanket. A baby, still breathing, barely, skin gray-blue chest rising faintly. And then like a whisper scraped from gravel, she said, "Don't bury her," not like they did the last one. Silas didn't move. The wind finally picked up, then slow, and sure not fierce, but enough to stir the ashes of things he hadn't dared remember. Who is this girl? And what kind of world makes a child carry a newborn across the dark just to ask a stranger not to bury her? Silas didn't ask the girl her name that night. He only stoked the stove, poured warm milk into a chipped cup, and watched her from across the room as she fed the infant in her arms with trembling hands. She sat stiffly, knees clamped together back, never touching the chair, like someone afraid to leave an impression. The baby whimpered once, a sharp, startled sound like it had been told to stay quiet its whole life, then settled again. Silas set a basin of warm water nearby, a clean rag folded over the edge. Still, she didn't move. "It's for her," he said simply. The girl nodded once, then wiped the baby's face as gently as he'd seen anyone tend to another soul. He didn't sleep that night. At first light, he went to the place where the first shoe was found. He followed the fence-line boots pressing into the thawing soil. 40 yards in, he found something he hadn't seen the first time: a second cross, smaller, carved hastily from 2 twigs bound with twine, and beneath it a shallow pit of disturbed earth. Silas dropped to one knee and brushed the soil away with calloused fingers. It wasn't bones he found. It was cloth, a child's dress, blue faded with soot, and near it a single rusted button in the shape of a star. He stood slowly. The air tasted of old iron and pine smoke, and something else, memory maybe. When he returned to the cabin, the girl was still sitting in the same place, eyes locked on the fire like it might burn the past out of her. "I need to know," he said gently. "What happened out there?" She looked up, her face unreadable. Then after a long pause, she said, "They said she cried too much, that it'd bring bad luck. So they buried her, but I dug her back up. I wasn't fast enough before." Silas felt the weight of those words settle in his chest like stones. "How many were there?" The girl answered without flinching. 4, me, her, and the others who didn't cry loud enough to be noticed. How many children had been forgotten by the world, and how many more were still out there, hoping someone might notice? The day passed quiet, too quiet for spring. Silas fixed the broken latch on the cabin door, but his hands moved slower than usual. The weight of what he'd unearthed sat in him like a second spine, straight, unmoving, unspoken. Every nail he hammered felt like a question he couldn't answer. Inside the girl she'd finally told him her name, Mira, sat with the baby tucked in a quilt, humming a tune with no words. It was the kind of tune passed from mother to daughter, except this time, it had nowhere to go but down through the hush of the cabin walls. Later, when he brought in firewood, she met him at the doorway. "I know you don't want trouble," Mira said. "And I am trouble." Silas didn't answer right away. He set the logs down in the bin, wiped his palms on his trousers, then looked her square in the eye. "You said they buried the baby. But what about you?" She looked away. "They sold me back to the foreman, said I wasn't worth feeding anymore. And you ran." She nodded. "They'll come looking," he said, voice low. "I know." A long pause hung between them. Only the ticking of the old wall clock broke it. "I can leave before they get here," she whispered. "Tonight even." Silas exhaled slowly. "That baby's sleeping now. You should too. We'll talk in the morning." She stared at him like she wasn't sure if that was mercy or delay. Then she walked back to the rocker, held the infant against her chest, and closed her eyes. That night, Silas couldn't sleep again. He sat by the dying fire, fingers tight around his coffee cup. He wasn't trying to be a savior, but the truth sat beside him now, breathing soft in a cradle made from his own wife's old laundry basket. And the wind outside it had changed. He thought he'd buried all his reasons to care, but now they cried softly in the next room. By the third morning, the fence line still hadn't been mended, and Silas hadn't saddled a horse. He just sat by the barn, oiling a rifle he hadn't touched in years. He hadn't told Mira why. He didn't have to. The tracks they'd found, deep, heavy, recent, cut across the northern pasture. Not ranch hands, not hunters, a wagon. Too clean, too direct. Someone looking for something, or someone. Inside, Mira swept the floors like she meant to clean more than dust. The baby Dell, she'd whispered the name once in her sleep, was quieter now. Not sick, just watchful. Like she'd learned already that silence was safer than sound. That afternoon, Silas hitched his old mule cart and rode into town. He didn't bring a list, but came back with supplies anyway, more than he needed. Diapers, sugar, a small sack of coffee beans, and a coil of rope he didn't plan to use but knew might matter. As the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, he found Mira on the porch peeling potatoes. He set the sack down beside her and didn't say a word. She looked at what he'd brought, then at him. not grateful, just knowing. Like she understood this was how he talked. Later that night, as the fire popped low and the baby stirred in the cradle, Silas stepped out and found something hanging on the fence post. A single boot, old, mud-caked, but with a coin tied to its heel, a message. They were closer now. He didn't go back inside right away, just stood in the dark, one hand on the wood rail, listening for the wind. And inside, Mira waited, not asleep, not afraid anymore, just waiting for him to choose. He thought he'd buried his past, but it was still riding toward him, one boot at a time. Silas didn't tell Mira about the boot, didn't need to. She saw it when she stepped out to hang laundry the next morning, froze for just a moment, then turned and went back inside without folding a thing. They spoke little that day. She fed the baby, he split wood, she patched a rip in her dress, he sharpened the axe. They circled each other gently like animals that had learned trust by injury, not by promise. It was near sundown when the rider came. Not loud, not rushed, just steady hooves through the canyon brush, a bay gelding, long-legged, proud. The man in the saddle wore a black coat, though the heat didn't ask for one. No dust on it, no kindness either. Mira saw him first. She stood on the porch, baby in one arm, the other braced against the doorframe. She didn't blink. Silas came from the barn with no rifle, no dog, no warning, just his body between the man and the house. "Been a long time," the man said. Silas didn't answer. The man spat in the dirt. "I'm here for what's mine." Inside, Mira sat the baby down in a crate lined with towels, then stepped out beside Silas. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "You sold me." The man didn't flinch, didn't sell the girl. Silas took a step forward. The man's hand hovered near his belt, but he didn't draw. "She ain't yours no more," Silas said quietly. A long pause. Then the man laughed, once hollow. "You gonna raise another man's bastard?" Mira flinched but didn't step back. "No," Silas said, his jaw like stone. "I'm just giving her a place to stand." The rider's grin faltered. "I ain't going nowhere," Mira said, voice like dry grass rustling. And just then, the baby cried from inside, not loud, just enough to remind them all what life had dared to remain. The rider turned his horse without a word. Dust rose, but no threat came with it. Back inside, the fire was low, and Mira rocked the child without singing. Silas sat across the room, his hands quiet in his lap. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked this time. "Now," he said, "we start being less afraid." She wasn't running anymore, and he wasn't hiding. There were no parades, no town apologies, no miracles carved in the sky. But Silas fixed the porch rail, and Mira planted marigolds under the window. The baby Ruthie grew fat on goat milk and sun, her small hands grasping at the world like she meant to belong in it. No papers were signed, no preacher called. But by the time the first frost came, folks in town had stopped whispering. They still stared, old habits dying harder than weeds, but Silas never looked back, and Mira never bowed her head again. In the mornings, she swept the front step and left a bowl of oats for the birds. In the evenings, he came in smelling of cedar, and horses hung his hat on the same peg and always touched her shoulder like it mattered. Some days were harder than others. Mira still had dreams of boots on wood, of doors slamming open. Silas still kept a rifle under the bed, not because he wanted to use it, but because he remembered the silence that followed too many regrets. But most nights they sat on the porch after Ruthie fell asleep, just breathing. Sometimes she told stories, half in English, half in the lullabies her grandmother used to hum. Sometimes he carved. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Because what do you say when you've outrun the worst of it? You don't shout. You don't boast. You stay. You stay through the storm, through the thaw, through the gentle return of spring. And if someone were to ride past their stretch of land now, they might see a woman shelling beans on the porch, a man stitching harness leather, a child chasing dust motes. They might not know the price paid to get there, but the wind would. The wind would know. They weren't rescued. They weren't redeemed. They just remained. And so the ranch stood quiet again, not empty, not hollow, just breathing. Where there had once been silence soaked in grief, there were now footsteps, soft but certain. Where something had once been buried in shame, it now bloomed tender and true. Silas Boone, the man who once believed some wounds were better left untouched, had learned instead that the land remembers, but people can choose. And sometimes when we stay long enough, when we listen past the wind and the fear and the ache, we find that healing doesn't always come like thunder. It comes like a girl choosing to stay, like a man choosing not to run, like a home being built from quiet things, a mended gate, a warm pan of cornbread, a soft voice saying you're safe now. Maybe your heart, like Silas's, has carried something too heavy too long. But maybe today you can set it down, just for a while. If this story touched you, if it made you feel less alone, would you share it with someone who might need it too? And if you'd like more stories like this, gentle, honest, and full of quiet hope, please subscribe to None Wild West Saga. Leave us a comment. Would you like to see what happens next? Or hear another tale of love found late but held dearly? We'll be right here by the fire, waiting.